So Weird West first person mod comes out today, and I made it, so here's some info about that. I worked on Weird West for a few years as a technical designer / systems designer, which broadly means I worked either a lot or a little on a lot of things: movement, AI, VFX, UI, fire propagation, abilities, tornadoes, crafting, the camera, the weather, the weapons, the interaction systems, optimization, barrels that have some amount of liquid in them and you can tip some out and it does stuff. It's a massive game. One thing I did quite a lot with was the camera, so after the game came out, I was familiar enough with it to want to jump back into the editor and hack in a first person mode as an experiment, sort of for no reason, or maybe just because I was always pretty impressed by how good the game's hand-drawn textures looked close up. I spent a few hours on it and got a result that was surprisingly cool but not particularly good, and a few months later I shared a video of it publicly, and the response was positive enough that Wolfeye asked if I could come back for a week or two to do it again, polish it up and turn it into a mod. I had to do this in as hacky and awful a way as possible because there wasn't much time, any changes I made had to not break the game's existing systems, and I had to touch as few files as possible. So that others could identify these changes easily, I tagged them all wintergreen mode. Years earlier I'd pushed through some unrelated changes to the camera which were at the time called Joe modes, so technically Weird West is always either in Joe mode or wintergreen mode. The quick and dirty version I'd done initially had glued the player camera to the character's nose, and then changed the turn input to directly you're the character instead of the camera. This basically did the trick, and it turned out a lot of the more scripted first-person interactions happen to look great like this, but it was pretty nauseating when running around. The mod version still does this, but only when you're doing a full-body one-off animation. The rest of the time the camera sits in the middle of your collision capsule like it does in most first-person shooters, but that means the character's body is constantly passing through the camera. To fix that, and also to get the weapons and hands into a good position on screen, I hook into the character's animation blueprint after everything else has been done, and if the play is in first person, I add a bunch of wacky situational bone offsets, mainly narrowed down through trial and error. For instance, the player's head never gets in the way of the camera because I force it backwards so that it's always behind the camera. This turns your character into a terrifying monstrosity. I also changed the character shader to add a distance cutoff to it, so if a character is too close to the camera, those pixels of the character won't be drawn. So if any part of the character does manage to clip slightly through the camera from behind, we won't see it. I found that while the game played surprisingly well in first person, some actions just didn't translate with the animations we had. Stealth takedowns were shaky and often had the hat or hair of the victim clipping through the camera. So I added a temporary third-person mode for those times. Stealth takedowns automatically go to a third-person camera that the player controls for the duration of the takedown, then we fly back into the character's head. I also used this for sneaking through grass, which didn't read well, and being a werewolf, which was pretty disorienting. Corpse carrying seemed like it might need this too, but bone offsets pretty much got it where it needed to be. I did this also for this slow-mo dive through the air, which I think ideally would stay first-person, but currently it's not clear from that perspective what's even supposed to be happening, so it's third. I also made the camera offset itself left or right slightly if you're diving towards or away from the camera so you don't block yourself. There's one special case situation I added for the third person camera, which is riding in a minecart. It's a hilarious thing to do, but looking at the inside of a cart's pretty boring. For a while it looked like I wasn't going to be able to get proper first person aim with pitch into the mod, since no C++ changes were allowed, and our existing 2D aiming system was in C++ and couldn't easily be disabled, which would have meant you couldn't fire diagonally up or down. In the end though, I figured out a stupid hack in the projectile class. A bullet is spawned from the gun as always, aimed at whatever the result of the 2D aiming system was. Then the bullet immediately takes its current location and rotation and transforms those into the space of the camera, preserving the weapon's spread, but in the direction of the camera. And this worked for throwing physics objects too. The edges of the outdoor levels in Weird West fade from terrain into paper map edges and into black, and this looked great from top down, but not so much from first person, so I made them fade out entirely instead, just showing sky below. It's not perfect, but it's better. At the risk of going overboard, I also threw in a proper sky, replacing the default blank one with UE4's atmospheric sky and volumetric fog. I also had to make changes to UI positioning, disable or tweak VFX that only made sense for isometric, hide trivial quest markers when you weren't nearby, and a lot of other little forgettable things like that. The result is still pretty janky, and you'll definitely run into issues, but with any luck they shouldn't stop you from playing through the game. Overall, this was a pretty cool and fun thing to get the opportunity to do, so everybody thank Wolfeye, and I hope you like this mod, and Weird West in general, and I hope you have fun. I don't know how this is going to age, but currently it looks like Twitter is dying, so if you want to follow me on Co-Host or Tumblr or I guess Mastodon, do feel free.